Authenticity. Is it the most important element of life? Well, the answer to this is indistinguishable, so possibly. Popular culture likes to obscure but also raise authenticity depending on the form of culture you follow almost. So despite becoming called like alternative culture, quite a lot of old culture is incredibly mainstream, which is I guess best seen through like fashion and music. So old fashioned, depending on where you're from, is incredibly common. I'm living in a city at the moment, and you see quite a lot of old fashioned. But another example is old music, and you can see this throughout the charts. A lot of people kind of quite like old music. Um, Now, old music, in my opinion, is quite genuine or genuine seeming, unlike the kind of, I guess, pop music, which is slightly less genuine, slightly more generic, and more kind of, I guess, arbitrary. So simultaneously, culture likes to attach and detach authenticity kind of where it feels like. And this also reflects in people. There are so many things these days that authentically you can prove yourself to be the person you are, but also you can detach from the person you are equally as easily. And both are completely valid. There are some times where just being yourself feels a bit shit. You got to do something else, try something else. And, Aristotle says you are what you repeatedly do. Your personality can change over time, and that can be authentic. It also can not be. You might be behaving in a way that isn't authentically yourself, and in which case, we'll get to that later. See, people who are always themselves unconditionally can be respectable, and to a strong extent, a lot of people are scared of being completely themselves all the time because they're scared of judgment or friction with other people. For example, like, this isn't always possible, but if you're a gay man in Saudi Arabia, it is very difficult to be yourself because of the strong judgment and abuse systemically that exists there. So, can you authentically be yourself there? Well, probably not. Also, you don't want your family and friends maybe to shun you, and this is something you find important, so you can't be yourself potentially. On the other hand, like not being yourself to some extent is a form of insanity. Now, quite a lot of artists in autobiographies or documentaries will talk about their public persona and then their private persona. Often the public persona being the one that is like slightly less satisfying for them to be because it's not their true personality, and they have to put this on stage or while they're performing, and this feels less realistic to their day-to-day life and their actual personality that they feel represents themselves. A famous example would be like Logic in 2017, where he left a 3 hour set after 40 minutes because he just felt overwhelmed by this character he had to put on. There are numerous other examples. Kanye West had it on stage as well, where he's just had massive breakdowns. I believe Queen, Freddie Mercury had a really bad one in the mid 80s as well. So it's impossible to truly live an authentic life for some people in those circumstances. Also, hiding from your true nature is most likely going to dismantle your persona, your actual authentic self. And this also isn't something that you want to do, or certainly I wouldn't personally prescribe to you to do. Living authentically does also change, and we're going to get into some life philosophy here. There's a form of philosophy that suggests it is impossible to truly know what's going on inside other people's minds. So, like, yes, brain scans do exist, but they can be manipulated in our ways to like get around them, essentially. So truly, there is no way of knowing what's going on inside of someone else's mind. I know what you're thinking. Behavior and like micro reactions often give away how someone's feeling. But these can also be fabricated, depending on how A, neurologically stable that person is, and B, how aware they are of you analysing them. People can counter analyse. This isn't necessarily unheard of. This simultaneously means other people's judgments of you may be completely wrong. So attempting to just like read into how other people see you, they might really like you. The way you're reading into it, you think, oh, they don't like me for whatever reason. It could be paranoia. It could just be the micros they're giving off at that current time are slightly hostile, but they themselves, in their head, they don't mind you, or they maybe don't like you when they think you do. It can work either way. It's a completely human trait to care about what others think of you to some extent. We are social animals. So being genuinely authentic, that is the goal. It is, you know, not necessarily wrong to be inauthentic sometimes, trying to please people. But at the same time, being purely inauthentic just to get a certain group of people to like you or certain individuals to like you is, in my opinion, not something you should do. But maybe you disagree. It might be advantageous for you for whatever reason. Maybe you're a bit of a Machiavel and you see that an individual person, maybe a relationship with them would be useful in some way. So being authentic is the goal. I think changing who you are is important. I'll call this being a social iguana. That's the term we've just coined. Being able to change your status or your individual performance depending on who you're with. For example, you're less likely to act like you do with your friends as you would in front of your in-laws the first time you meet them. Because not only would you not know them, but you're also trying to impress them. It's just inbuilt, and it's impossible to react the same way, I think, with everyone, even if you're trying consciously to do this. So your authentic behavior does change. Essentially, supposed authenticity is completely dependent on environment. So even if you feel like you're the same person, it's highly likely that there's small micro mannerisms that do change, and other elements of your personality that also change. For example, with your friends, you're more likely to swear and express yourself more liberally compared to with your grandparents, for example, where you possibly swear and shout with your friends. So you might say fuck or shit or something when you drop something on the floor. With your grandparents, you're probably likely to say something more tame, like, oh, damn, or something like that, you know? So what does it ultimately mean? Well, it basically means that humans are multifaceted and authenticity does genuinely change with circumstance quite regularly. Does it mean that being inauthentic? So, changing does not necessarily mean that you're being inauthentic. Possibly you are. And I think if you analyze a situation later, maybe when you've got time on your own, you'll be able to know that. Am I being my true self? Am I being true to myself? Am I changing myself for another person? Am I changing myself for this group of people? Am I changing myself for ulterior goals? And the answer is maybe. Maybe you are. Maybe you're not. And then you've got to judge, am I being authentic with them? And that's the important part. So I'm going to draw on another analogy. I support Wales. I'm pretty loud about this. If I'm watching an England-Wales match in England, I'm less likely to be vocal or loudly vocal about my support of my country because it's annoying. I don't want to be an inconvenience. Does that mean I'm supporting my country less? No. Does it mean I'm doing it in a less vocal way? Yes. In a Welsh pub when the anthem's going, I will fucking shout it. In an English pub when the anthem's going, I will probably just sing it at a normal volume because it's a different environment to be in. Does that mean I'm being inauthentic in those two different situations? No, it just means I'm reacting differently to my environment. In one environment, I might, get some minor kind of inconvenience or friction. And in the other environment, I might get, kind of more hospitable, friendly reaction to it. Maybe even endearing. And so it does depend completely on the situation you're in. So it might seem like a cop-out, but there are always ways to get through competing values. Quite a lot of philosophical theories do have competing values as an issue. I'm not necessarily putting this forward as a philosophical paper or doctrine on authenticity. I mean, I am an existentialist, but this is not a serious paper. I've written this down in text, and I can send you it if you would like to read the full thing. I'm kind of just listing it off now, but I think honestly, authenticity completely depends on the situation, who you're with, where you are, what time you're there. It all changes, and it's entirely subjective. And I think it is case by case. Now, is there something you'll always do authentically? Maybe. But that's really hard to judge. And I think with authenticity, it's difficult to do black and white. I think you can't just say in every single circumstance, this is you being authentically yourself. This is not you being authentically yourself. Unless you're just lying. And lying is something I'll get into in another video. If you want to see that, leave a comment. So is there a punishment for not living an authentic life? Well, ultimately, no. Like most philosophical theories, there is no punishment for you not enacting this theory. Although what I would say is your life will probably be less satisfying if you are living an authentic life. It will feel like you're not truly being yourself, and this, I mean, quite a lot of people do this. But that's why I think depression and anxiety and all this kind of stuff is at an all-time high. Because the human being is kind of, I guess, entrapped in the modern world and in a situation they don't necessarily feel comfortable being in. So why is, it more likely that you're going to have an unhappy life if you're not living authentically? Well, in a very basic, living a fulfilling life is important. And what we see as, I guess, fulfilling is something that is sustainable. Why do I say it has to be sustainable? Well, ultimately it doesn't, but I think the common view is that it is. Because, say, for example, if you truly want to be authentically happy, you'd probably just be high on heroin all the time. But most people wouldn't say this is a fulfilling life. I mean, being a junkie on heroin, does that sound like an authentically good life? Maybe it does. And in which case, that's why some people are heroin addicts. It happens. This doesn't mean that people kind of, you don't have to live the most healthy lifestyle ever. But quite a lot of people do like having that. Why quite a lot of people exercise or eat certain things or have certain hobbies because they think that living a healthy lifestyle is good, and it resultantly doesn't spiral your life down into kind of an unhealthy passage. So, does moderation have something to do with it? Well, yes. Living an authentically good life, is moderation important? You could argue yes. Does this mean that you can't do drugs? You can't have alcohol? No. But doing this on an extreme level or a regular level consistently will likely ruin your life and you'll be less likely to authentically enjoy it. I think if you're in a K-hole all the time, struggling to stay awake or whatever it might be, you're having severe paranoia, possibly. Now, why does society shun this kind of thing? Well, most people do not authentically believe they'd be happy doing it, and so they prescribe other people with terms like junkie or alcoholic or fat, They're kind of overindulgence in certain things, alcoholism, food, or drugs. And resultantly, this isn't really seen as something that's good. Does this mean that the person on it isn't happy? Not necessarily. They might authentically be loving heroin or alcohol or food. But there are more healthy ways of living, and I think that's why it's prescribed this way. Now, what does authenticity have to do with yourself? Ultimately, it's the freedom to choose what you want to do. Other people can tell you, not to do heroin, not to do ketamine, not to do, not to eat dog food or whatever weird shit you do. I definitely don't do those things. So, right? But on the whole, it's kind of prescription. It's saying, I don't do this, you shouldn't do it either. And I think authenticity ultimately comes down to the individual. If the person is not doing harm to others and they're an adult and they're sound of mind, common consensus, or certainly the way I think it should be, is you just let them do their thing. They authentically believe it's what's good for them. Might they change their mind in the future? Yes. And that's why you advise them not to do things. But that's all you can really do. Intervening, I feel like, is kind of taking away their freedom and their right to authenticity, which is something that I believe is very important, that freedom to choose for themselves. But I think ultimately, authenticity is kind of being selfish, but also thinking about others, and then finding somewhere between the two. Not even a middle ground. It might be 70% selfish, 30% thinking about others. It might be 90% thinking about yourself, 30% thinking. That is not maths. 90-10. I don't know why. It's fucking 3 a.m. I'm gonna end the video in a minute. Because if I can't do simple maths, That's a problem. But yeah, before it seems really obvious, the last thing I'll leave you on is if you do buy into this doctrine of authenticity, you think that whatever you're doing is important, that you're doing it authentically for yourself or for others or whatever the reason might be, just stop and think the next time you do something and think, is this authentically what I want to do? If it is, do it. If it's not, have a second thought. What the consequences of you doing it will be. Alright. Good night. Bye.